Welcome to Renewable New Mexico, a program about the people and companies that make our state an epicenter for renewable energy innovation. My name is Shawn Wells and I'm your host. Today's topic is Home Suite Experiment, and to help us explore it is our first guest today, Paul Lusk, Emeritus Professor of Architecture at the University of New Mexico. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
What brought you here to New Mexico?
Well, partly by chance. I knew Peter Van Dresser, who was a solar pioneer here in New Mexico. I knew him in Philadelphia in the early 60s. We worked together, and he left permanently and to set up in New Mexico. He had been here before, but he decided that's where he wanted to be. And about 1968, I continued working in Philadelphia and Boston. In 1968, drove out to actually Arizona to work with Paulo Solari. And
Wow.
I stopped in New Mexico and stopped in to see Peter Van Dresser in northern New Mexico, El Rito. And our car broke down, our vehicle broke down. And seriously.
Divine intervention?
Yes. No, just, so Peter invited us, actually inveigled us into joining his project there in El Rito, in the Potrero area, just northwest of El Rito.
And that was your, it sounded like you already had a sensitivity working with Paulo about environmental concerns, and then you transferred that to renewable energy?
Yes, I think there's really one major part of environmental concerns are renewable energy. Mm-hmm. While I was at Peters in the late 60s, we started building our first solar home on the land there, the Potrero, it's called, Van Dresser's. Unfortunately, and we were nearing completion, someone broke in and burned it. The whole place burned down, all my tools, all my drawings, all my work, children's photographs, everything. So I had to work to replenish. So I came down to Albuquerque and worked first at the city of Albuquerque as a planner, and was asked to teach a course at UNM, and then a second course, and then a studio, and decided that was really what I wanted to do and share rather than do. So I taught there architecture, planning, and ecological design for 30 years, so since retired.
So people that don't know Peter's work, how would you describe his role in the development of what you're talking about here with?
Well, he, as far as I know, built the first two intentionally solar buildings. One was retrofit, another was a new building in New Mexico, beyond the work done by Bridges and Paxton for a commercial solar building. He built a residence in Santa Fe and another up in the Potrero. And when I stopped to visit him, he encouraged me to go ahead and build there in that site because he was developing a community of like-minded people.
And that clearly had a strong influence on your decisions for your own home. I know that you've developed a project for yourself, mm-hmm. And you've taken that practical experience that he gave you and then this educational experience mm-hmm. that you had at UNM and combined them into this unique project. Can you tell us about that project?
Well, I was going to say first, I went to school at the University of Pennsylvania, graduate school, and I got a degree in architecture, master's in architecture. I studied under Lou Kahn, but when I was there, I learned more from Ian McHarg. Many of you may not know him, but his work, Design with Nature, is probably a central piece of work in the field of landscape and ecological design. And he really inspired the whole idea of working in a way not to harm but to enhance the development of any project. It was about the time of the Mercury astronauts, if you may, or those who might remember the early 60s.
I was a zygote, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was a zygote at that time.
Okay.
But
well,
inform me.
Well, yeah, it was the first views we had of the planet Earth as a single image, which now we're quite familiar with. But that was the first view. And Ian
It just
McHarg
really changed people's perspective of our responsibility to the Earth.
That's right. Yeah. And Ian McHarg, who was Scottish and had a strong brogue, said he wasn't sure. He looked at the planet and he said, pictures of the planet, and says he wasn't sure whether the human race was yeast or a virus. And that thought has been in my mind ever since. So the idea of not harming, not being a virus, of not polluting or not contaminating, or rather to enhance the performance of any site that you develop. That's been a basis of my work since.
That's beautiful, and that's been a theme throughout many of these interviews that we're conducting, that the people that we're talking to have made conscious choices to be a positive part of this cycle. And we do have that choice on a daily basis. We can make small changes, but cumulatively, are we going to be overall positive or negative in our daily living? So you've made the choice to be a positive part of our cycle. What have you done with your project?
Well, it's a learning process, really. The idea of not harming is, sustainable, but sustainable isn't enough. Sustainable is really treading water. It's good, but the idea of actually enhancing is a process of learning how to do that. Just that. I could give you examples, I guess. We have and still have a small farm south of Albuquerque that has been our learning station, our research facility, and how to do things, and things that worked and things that didn't work. But we've over time developed a series of projects to, for example, purify water. All of our water in the house goes through a wetland, does not go back to the ground. So it's all becomes part of, or irrigates. But we also have, it's nearly entirely solar. Because there's trees adjacent, we don't get all of the sun that, we've worked some time to cool the house. But we've learned how to not cause runoff as a result of development. So the house essentially absorbs the water. Adjacent to the house, and 100% of the water is absorbed. It also has cooling tubes under a swamp that's adjacent that cools a substantial portion of the house. And we have a passive downdraft cooling system. So a number of systems that we've worked on and developed and learned from, and has become part of my teaching, how to work in a way to enhance.
And one of our earlier guests who had constructed a similar home talked about how you don't have to sacrifice things to live in this positive manner, live thoughtfully. And you and I share an architecture background. What I really enjoyed about your project is that you brought a lot of beauty to the project. It's a beautiful building, and the marshlands that you talked of, the wetlands that process the bioproducts from the house, it's beautiful. You can actually enhance the quality of living by making these choices that for others seem difficult or are sacrificial. I love what you did with the details.
Yeah, I think we found that rather than think of architecture or development as an image or form or something, to think of it as performances. And if you actually look at any site, your own lot or a street or a city or the planet, as a set of performances, and really do a little science or data gathering. What happens there? How much sun falls on it? What happens? Is there photosynthesis? How much? The water, what happens to it? Does it run off, or is it absorbed? And in doing so, then looking at how you can enhance those performances, often the product is quite beautiful, but it wasn't your first purpose, your intent. It's surprising.
Now, you're working with collegiate level students. What thought do you like to leave with them when you're teaching a course?
Well, I think this idea of enhancement as a product of their work, enhancement of the whole product, whether it's a particular place or social purpose and so forth, it's not as easy as just saying the word, because it always involves trade-offs, and you never can have 100% improvement in all things. So it's always trying to find a balance and trying to make sure that by actually calculating performances that you have a net improvement. Because if you don't, any negative aspect accumulates and ultimately is not sustainable.
Beautiful. It's poetic.
Done.
Okay, I've got some enchanting New Mexico questions to ask you. Your choice is sunshine, wind, or biomass.
All three. They're not either or. I would add geothermal to that. I think
Okay.
the idea of renewable as a fundamental, not as a, you clearly need other options, but focusing on those is, I think, essential.
And active or passive?
Well, I've done both, and I've found when you do active, it ends up passive. But yeah, something goes wrong. So it's always, there's always trade-offs again, but the systems that have lasted the longest for us are those that are passive or as close as we can get to passive.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for bringing your energy here today. It was a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for everything you've done towards educating our next generation.
Well, actually, I'm still learning. We just 2 years ago put in a photovoltaic system that serves the house, serves all of our electric needs for the whole farm, in fact. And we're grid connected, so we sell the electricity to P&M. And we had enough extra that I converted an old Ford truck to electric. So now we have 100% solar truck. It uses no gas and, in fact, no electricity outside of the solar panels that are on
And
our
that's
place.
how you got here today.
We drove here
Well,
today.
thanks for the effort, and come visit us again.
Thank you.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. We'll be right back with our next guest, Don Miller. Welcome back to Renewable New Mexico. Today's topic is Home Sweet Experiment, and our guest today is Don Miller, and he's practicing what he preaches, living off the grid right here in New Mexico. Don, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you.
So, what brought you to New Mexico? Are you a New Mexican originally?
No, I'm originally from upstate New York in the snow belt, and I like the idea of living in the sun, and the land of enchantment was enchanted me when I came through here and moved here in the mid to late 1970s.
And haven't looked back.
Right. Enjoyed it ever since.
Now, what sparked your interest in renewable energy?
Oh, as I look back, my first experiences were probably reading the Mother Earth News and started seeing stories about people experimenting with solar hot water, and then some things came up about wind generation. And then shortly after that, a magazine called Alternative Sources of Energy came out, and not too long after that, Wind Power Digest. So I got subscriptions of those and read and studied, and eventually went out and found some old Jacobs wind generators that had been around since the 1930s, and it just kind of took off from there.
Wow, and at that time, was New Mexico really a hotbed for those kinds of resources?
It's hard to say a hotbed because I didn't know what was going on in the rest of the country, but there was definitely a lot of things going on here because of our abundant sunshine, and also everybody knows we have quite a lot of wind here too.
Yeah, and it sounds like you took a lot advantage of all of those resources with your project. I know we've invited you here today because you are living off the grid, which is
Right.
an exciting proposition to prove that it can be done. Can you tell us a little bit about your project? I call it a project, but it's your home.
Right. Well, you know, I studied solar and wind energy for quite a few years, and I was on the board with the New Mexico Solar Energy Association, who's putting this series together. And I built a house down near Magdalena years ago, which was adobe, and it was passive solar, so I had direct gain through the windows, and I was running it on a Jacobs wind generator I had rebuilt at that time. My current home is a monolithic dome, which is spray concrete and insulation on the outside, and it's passive solar as well as active. I have an in-floor radiant system and hot water panels that provide the heat for the floor, and that does about 80% of my heating. And I back it up with propane, and I use somewhere between 200 and 300 gallons a year, and that also takes care of my cooking and my clothes dryer. So it's a pretty small amount of propane that I use in a year.
Just a supplement.
Right.
And with the heating and cooling we've got pretty extreme fluctuation from night to day and from summer to winter. Can you manage all of that with the system that you have in place?
Yeah, it works really well because my home has a lot of thermal mass with the concrete. The temperatures don't vary a whole lot, and these days it's getting up around 78 during the day, and then at sundown I open the windows, and in the morning it's about 70 degrees. So you really don't have the temperature swing you have in a standard wood frame house.
Are you running into any issues with the weather and controlling the temperature?
Only when it gets real hot, then it will tend to warm up a little more than I'd like it to, but I use overhead fans to keep the air moving, and it still works pretty well. In the wintertime, I actually shut my solar heating system off because the temperature fluctuation I don't have like in a standard house, and then in the morning I'll turn it back on when the sun comes up. So, you know, I'm not running a central heating system all night, so it's a much more efficient way to heat my home.
And you're also deriving other resources. You're off the grid, which goes beyond the renewable solar things that we're talking here. But you're actually implementing some water systems as well.
I have a water catchment system to utilize rain catchment off of my shop garage, which I use to water an orchard. And I also use wind power to supplement my photovoltaic panels, which provide my electricity. But these days, the only time I really need to use that is like a month's time between about the middle of December to the middle of January. And the rest of the year, the solar does fine. I also use a local company's trackers for my photovoltaics, and it tracks the sun all day.
So you're maximizing that
right,
sun input.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about tracking systems for someone that doesn't know what you're talking about?
These are actually what's called a passive tracker because they have a tube on each end of the tracking system, and it transfers freon from one to the other, and it just tips all day long. And the end of the day, it's pointing west, but in the morning, the sun hits the lower one, and it shifts that weight, and it brings it back to the east.
So actually, the change in temperature is causing the motion.
Right.
So you're actually not using any energy to move
Right.
the panel itself. That's
Right.
really cool. I didn't realize that.
There are some that are active, which use some of the electric power and run an electric motor, and they are probably a little more accurate at focusing at the sun, but these work quite well.
So you've got a dome structure. So it's basically a half dome all the way to the ground.
Right.
How do you integrate the solar panels to a shape like that? Is it on a separate bed? I'm sure we'll get to visit it soon.
The hot water part of it, or
well, both. Yeah.
Well, the hot water panels are on a rack that's outside of the house, and then the antifreeze water comes in underground, and it goes through a heat exchanger in my hot water tank, but also flows directly through the floor. My electrical system is basically underground too, as far as the infrastructure of it, and the panels sit out probably 150 feet from the house.
What originally motivated you to live this kind of alternative Probably for you, it doesn't feel alternative, but
Right, it
for
doesn't.
some people, it's very extreme. What drove you to do all this research and build this kind of home?
I felt like there was a better way to produce power because I had seen what potential of nuclear and coal-fired power plants and what it did to the environment as far as mining the coal and then burning it in the smokestacks. And being originally from upstate New York, I knew about the acid rain that was coming into the lakes in New York, and they had to actually lime them to reduce the acidity of them so the fish could live in them. And I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. Mm-hmm. And renewable energy, the solar and the wind, very much foot the bill. Mm-hmm. There's so many different ways of using solar energy. I also have a solar cooker, and if people come to the solar fiesta that the Solar Energy Association puts on, they'll see a great big one where it focuses the sun into a box, and we make cookies, and you can make bread, and I cook squash in it and various things. So
that's great.
You can actually take the heat out of your home in the summertime, and it helps
Put it towards something good.
keep the house cool at the same time. So it has a couple of advantages there. So
that's fantastic, and I love the circularness of it.
Right.
Well, is there a project in particular that excites you on your home, like the favorite thing that you've done, kind of a parting thought that you could leave someone with? Like, what made the biggest difference in the choices you made?
Boy, I can't pinpoint one thing. It's like putting all these things together in a workable unit. There's a lot of different ways to go about these, but I chose to put a passive and active heating system in it, which was very nice. But I also like the idea of a round structure for a house. I always liked the Native American teepees, and it kind of follows along that line. Mm-hmm.
And what is it about that? It's just perfectly efficient, the round structure. Is that what appeals to you?
A couple of things, but I think one of the first things that attracted me to it, it's literally a storm-proof building. Mm-hmm. Tornadoes have gone over these things, and since there's no corners, it can't get a hold of it. And it would probably be a good thing for people to have these in the Midwest where they lose their homes every few years. But
yeah. Okay, I've got a few enchanting questions that we are asking our guests. Are you ready for those?
Sure.
Okay. The first one is sunshine, wind, or biomass?
I think all of those are valuable, and I think we need all of those to be utilized in one way or another.
And it seems like you are using all those effectively in your home, but the one that stands out to me is the biomass, the choosing to use the concrete on the home to really take advantage of that passive regulation. Active or passive?
I use both. I think they're both work very well, although there's a lot less things that can go wrong with a passive system, because you basically have windows and you have storage, thermal mass, brick or whatever. I have a concrete floor, and that heats up too. So they're both very legitimate technologies.
Thank you so much for bringing your energy here today to the show. That's all we have time for. I wish we had more time.
Thank you.
That's our program. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us next week for more Renewable New Mexico. Until next time, this is Shawn Wells reminding you we are all solar powered.